Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This time, we're going deep on one of the heavy hitters in philosophy, Immanuel Kant's critique of pure reason.
Oh yeah, this one.
It's known for being really dense and complex, but we're here to break it down,
Yeah.
make it make sense. Extract those golden nuggets.
That's right.
Yeah.
Kant was grappling with this big question, like how much can we really know about the world?
Yeah.
Is it all just sense experience or is there something more to it?
Yeah, he wasn't just trying to figure out, like, what is out there,
Right.
but how our minds even grasp those whats.
Absolutely.
It's like,
yeah.
before we can even understand the universe, we got to understand our own understanding.
Exactly. And that's where a priori knowledge comes in. So this is the kind of knowledge that's not based on experience,
Okay,
but it's the foundation of how we experience things.
gotcha.
So for Kant, space and time, these aren't things we learn.
Interesting.
They're like built-in features of our minds. So our minds are actively structuring our experience with these, not just passively receiving it.
Okay, so like before I even see a tree,
Right.
my mind already has the concept of space to put that tree on it.
That's right.
That's wild.
Yeah.
But if it's not from experience, then where does all this a priori stuff come from?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, and it's part of what makes Kant so fascinating.
Yeah.
He goes on to identify these other fundamental categories of understanding, like cause and effect, substance, and quantity.
Oh, okay.
Think of them like mental lenses that are built into our brains.
Gotcha.
They shape how we interpret everything.
So it's not that the world is the certain way,
Right.
but that we can only understand it through these like Kantian lenses.
Yeah.
I mean, does that mean that everyone perceives things the same way since we all have these same mental categories?
That's a great question. And it leads us to one of Kant's most famous distinctions, phenomena versus noumena. So phenomena is the world as we experience it, filtered through those mental categories we were talking about. But noumena is the world as it exists in itself, independent of our experience.
Hold on. If we can only access this phenomena,
Yeah.
does that mean this noumena, this real reality,
Mhm.
is like a locked room we can never get into?
Yeah.
I mean, how can we even talk about it if it's beyond our perception?
That is the challenge that Kant throws down. So we can't know the noumena directly,
Okay.
but we can reason about its implications.
Yeah.
So think about free will, for example.
Okay.
If all we ever perceive are the phenomena of our choices, does that mean true freedom actually exists in this noumenal realm?
Wow.
This is where it gets really interesting. It forces us to question the boundaries of what we can actually know.
It's a bit unsettling, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's almost like there's this vast, unknowable reality
Mhm.
lurking beneath everything that we experience.
Yeah.
But if our knowledge is limited to phenomena, how do we avoid getting trapped in like a world created by our own minds?
Right. And that's where this idea of transcendental idealism comes in.
Okay.
And so it's not that the external world doesn't exist, but rather we can only know it through the lens of our own mental framework. It's kind of like looking through colored glasses. You see the world tinted by those glasses, but you can still acknowledge that the world itself exists beyond that tint.
Right.
Right.
So it's not that our minds create reality,
Right.
but they shape how we access it.
Exactly.
So our understanding is kind of like a co-creation
Yes.
between the mind and the world.
Yeah, exactly. A co-creation. And this has huge implications for how we approach knowledge.
Right.
It means that we need to be aware of those Kantian glasses, those categories and concepts that shape our perceptions.
Gotcha.
We need to be critical thinkers, questioning our assumptions, recognizing the limitations of our own perspective.
Man, this is making me realize how much I just take for granted about how I see the world.
Yeah.
But if we can't fully grasp this noumenal world,
Right.
does that mean we're just stuck dealing with appearances?
Well,
What about those like big philosophical questions
Yeah.
about the ultimate nature of reality?
that's where Kant takes us next, into the realm of what he calls pure reason.
Okay.
So this is reason trying to operate without the input of experience.
Wow.
And he argues that when we use pure reason to tackle those big metaphysical questions, we inevitably run into contradictions.
So it's like our minds are hitting a wall
Yeah.
when trying to grasp the infinite.
Yeah.
That's kind of a bummer.
Right.
Does this mean we should just give up on trying to understand those big questions altogether?
Not necessarily. So this failure of pure reason
Okay.
is actually like a doorway to something else, practical reason.
Okay.
And this is where Kant finds a basis for morality, ethical decision-making, even without having all the metaphysical answers.
Interesting.
So he shifts the focus from what can we know for sure
Right.
to how should we act in the world.
Okay, so even if we can't definitively answer those big questions about reality,
Right.
we can still live a meaningful life
Yeah,
based on reason and ethical principles.
exactly.
That's kind of hopeful, actually.
It is hopeful. And this leads us to one of Kant's most famous ideas, the categorical imperative,
Okay.
which is his attempt to formulate a universal moral law, a principle that applies to all rational beings, regardless of their desires or circumstances.
This categorical imperative, I don't know, it always felt kind of rigid to me.
Yeah.
How does Kant account for all those, like, gray areas in ethical dilemmas
Right.
where following a universal rule might lead to some negative consequences?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it gets to the heart of how Kant's ethics actually work. Maybe we should dig into that a bit deeper.
Yeah, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
I mean, we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
From a priori knowledge
Mhm.
to the limits of pure reason to this, like, tantalizing hint of practical reason.
That's right.
I'm definitely ready to unpack this categorical imperative a bit more.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Okay, so let's dig into this categorical imperative.
Right.
Before the break, we were talking about how Kant shifts things, like from what can we know to how should we act?
Right.
So how does this categorical imperative actually work? What makes it so important to Kant?
Well, for Kant, this categorical imperative is like a moral compass.
Okay.
You know, it points us towards actions that are inherently good, regardless of their outcomes. So it's about acting out our duty to this moral law, not just for personal gain or happiness.
So instead of asking, like, will this action make me happy?
Right.
I should be asking, is this action in line with, like, a universal moral principle?
Exactly.
That seems like a pretty high bar for, like, everyday decision making.
It definitely requires a shift in perspective.
Yeah.
So Kant famously formulated the categorical imperative like this. Act only according to that maxim, whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law.
So, like, before I act, I have to imagine, like, everyone else acting the same way.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
If it creates a contradiction or a world that you wouldn't want to live in, then, you know, it's probably not morally sound.
Okay, but doesn't that get really tricky in real life situations?
Yeah.
Like, what if lying could save someone's life?
Well, that's where the real work of ethical reasoning begins, right?
Yeah.
So Kant would argue that even in those difficult cases, you shouldn't make exceptions for yourself. So lying, even to protect someone, undermines the very concept of truth and trust that a functioning society actually depends on.
Right. I see how upholding that universal principle
Yeah.
is important in the long run,
Yeah,
even if it leads to some tough choices in the moment.
exactly.
It's about considering the broader impact of our actions, not just the immediate consequences.
Absolutely. And this connects to another key aspect of Kant's ethics, which is treating people as ends in themselves, never solely as means to an end.
So not just using people to get what I want,
Yeah.
even if I think it's for a good reason.
Exactly.
So each person has inherent worth and dignity,
Yeah,
regardless of their usefulness to me.
precisely. So for Kant, this respect for persons comes from the fact that we're all rational beings. We're capable of making our own choices and setting our own goals. We shouldn't reduce others to mere tools for our own purposes.
It sounds like Kant's pushing for, like, a more just and equitable world
Yeah.
where everyone's treated with respect and dignity. But we were talking earlier about the limits of pure reason.
Right.
How does that fit in with this idea of, like, a universal moral law?
Yeah.
Isn't morality a kind of pure concept too?
That's a really insightful connection.
Yeah.
So Kant argues that while pure reason might struggle with metaphysical concepts, it's actually in the realm of practical reason
Okay.
that morality shines through. So this is the reason that guides our actions.
I gotcha.
He even suggests that the very possibility of morality depends on a concept that pure reason just can't prove: freedom.
So even if we can't definitively know if we have free will,
Right.
we have to assume it in order to act morally.
Exactly.
That's a fascinating twist.
It is, because if our actions are all predetermined, then the concept of moral responsibility kind of falls apart.
Yeah.
So Kant's basically saying that our capacity for moral choice is what makes us truly human.
This is making me think about how we often separate thinking from doing.
Yeah.
But for Kant, they're like deeply intertwined.
Absolutely.
It's not enough to just contemplate ethical principles.
Right.
We have to actually act on them.
We have to act on them, and that action needs to come from a place of genuine freedom.
Right.
Not just blind obedience or self-interest. It's about recognizing our own autonomy and respecting the autonomy of others.
You know, it's easy to get lost in like the abstract ideas with Kant.
Yeah.
But this discussion is making it all feel so relevant to everyday life.
It is.
It's like he's giving us this framework for navigating the complexities of the world.
Right.
And making choices that are both rational and ethical.
Yeah. He's definitely pushing us to be more conscious, deliberate about our actions.
Right.
To consider their impact on ourselves and others. And that's a challenge that continues to resonate with us today, even centuries after he wrote the Critique.
It's amazing to think that ideas from a philosophical text written so long ago can still offer such valuable insights.
Yeah.
But I'm curious,
Yeah.
what kind of impact did Kant actually have on the world?
Right.
Did his ideas just stay within like the realm of academic philosophy?
Okay.
Or did they have a broader reach?
Kant's influence extends far beyond the ivory tower.
Really?
Yeah. His ideas have shaped fields, from science and law to politics and art, and they continue to be debated and reinterpreted by thinkers all around the world.
Wow. So in a way, Kant's still having a conversation with us.
Right.
Even across the centuries.
Right.
And we're not just like passive listeners in this conversation.
No.
We're actively engaging with his ideas, questioning them, applying them to our lives, and maybe even challenging them.
Exactly. And that's perhaps the greatest legacy of Kant's work, the call to think critically, to question assumptions, and to never stop striving for a more reasoned and ethical way of being in the world.
This deep dive has definitely been a journey, but I feel like we've only scratched the surface of what Kant has to offer.
Right.
I'm eager to hear more about his lasting impact on the world.
Let's do it.
So we're back and ready to explore this legacy of Kant.
Right.
You know, we've been digging deep into these ideas, but I'm curious.
Yeah.
Do they just stay within philosophy classrooms? Or do they actually have like an impact out in the world?
Well, Kant's influence is massive, reaching far beyond academia.
Really?
His ideas have had a profound impact on fields, from science, law, politics, and even art.
Wow.
You could say he shaped how we think about the world today.
Huh. Really?
Yeah.
But how? Give me like a concrete example. Where can we see Kant's ideas at work, like out in the wild?
Well, take science, for example.
Okay.
Kant's emphasis on the limits of knowledge and the importance of critical thinking.
Right.
That revolutionized how scientists approach their work.
Oh, interesting.
They no longer seek absolute certainty about the world,
Right.
but rather they focus on developing testable hypotheses and refining their understanding through observation and experimentation.
So in a way, Kant helped pave the way for the scientific method itself.
Yeah, he provided a philosophical foundation for understanding that the world doesn't just passively reveal its secrets to us.
Right.
We have to actively engage with it, question our assumptions, and test our theories.
Gotcha.
It's an ongoing process of discovery, not just a static set of truths.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And what about his ethical framework? We talk about the categorical imperative
Right.
and treating people's ends in themselves.
Yeah.
Did those ideas have an impact outside of philosophy?
Absolutely. Kant's ideas about universal moral principles and the inherent dignity of all persons have been hugely influential in the development of human rights.
Wow.
They've also shaped ethical decision-making in fields like medicine and law and continue to inform contemporary discussions about social justice and global ethics.
So when we talk about things like equality, fairness, respecting everyone's rights, regardless of their background or beliefs, we're essentially echoing Kant's ideas.
You could say that Kant provided the philosophical groundwork for those values. He pushed us to recognize the inherent worth of each individual, regardless of their social status, their background, or even their usefulness to us.
Right.
It's about acknowledging that we're all part of this shared moral community with obligations to one another.
You know, it's one thing to understand these ideas intellectually, but it's another to actually like live them out in the real world.
Right.
It makes you wonder, how did Kant himself put these principles into practice in his own life?
Well, Kant was known for his rigorous adherence to his principles.
Oh, really?
He lived a very disciplined and structured life, almost to an extreme degree.
Yeah.
He was deeply committed to his work, his students, and the pursuit of truth. His actions were always carefully considered, and guided by his moral compass.
It almost sounds like he was trying to embody the categorical imperative
Right.
in his daily routine.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how challenging it is to truly align your actions with your beliefs,
Yeah.
especially when you're faced with difficult choices.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process of self-reflection and striving to act in accordance with our values, even when it's hard.
Yeah.
And that's one of the most enduring lessons of Kant's philosophy, the importance of continuous self-improvement, both intellectually and morally.
This deep dive has really been eye-opening.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm walking away with a whole new appreciation for Kant's brilliance, his complexity, and how his ideas continue to shape our world.
Right.
But I have to admit, I was a bit intimidated by the critique at first,
Yeah.
but now I'm actually eager to keep exploring his work.
Well, that's the beauty of great thinkers like Kant. They challenge us, provoke us, and ultimately leave us with more questions than answers.
Right.
And in those questions, in that ongoing struggle to understand, lies the potential for growth and a deeper engagement with the world.
And isn't that what the deep dive is all about?
Yeah, it is.
Pushing ourselves to think critically, explore new ideas, and maybe even change our minds along the way.
Absolutely. It's about embracing the journey of lifelong learning.
Right.
And recognizing that knowledge is a collaborative process.
Yeah.
We learn from the great thinkers of the past, from each other, and from our own experiences.
So to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Kant's critique of pure reason.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We hope it's sparked your curiosity, challenged your assumptions, and inspired you to continue exploring the ideas that shape our world.
Remember, philosophy is not just about dusty old books.
Right.
It's a living conversation.
Yeah.
And we invite you to be a part of it.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive for another adventure in the realm of ideas.
See you then.
Until then, keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.